We're going to begin with one of the most important issues that we're facing, the role of women. Yes, and we have some of the most significant thinkers and activists on that topic. We are delighted that they're here. They've come from different parts of the country to be with us. They've written many, many books. Their bios are online. And we're very pleased that Sharon Kugler, who's the first woman chaplain at Yale, is chairing this panel. That was quite a breakthrough for Yale, as you can imagine. So, without further ado, Ecofeminism, the Earth, Journey of the Universe, and the significant role of women.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. I'd like to first invite you to silence your cell phones. You're not going to want to miss a moment of this. I'm personally just so thrilled to have been invited to help moderate this panel. I have been inspired by the work of these women for so many years, dating back to first exposure in 1985 when I took a feminist theology class at the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley. And so to just sit here, I feel you need to pinch me. But anyway, the last thing I want to say before we begin is to thank Mary Evelyn and John for creating a space that feels intimate in the midst of such largeness. And really, that's your life's work, is to bring that home to us and to have us embedded in the universe in this way. And I just feel that Yale is incredibly blessed to have you here. And the faithfulness in which you do this work is nothing short of remarkable. So thank you. So to begin, I'm going to turn the mic over to Mary Hunt from the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual. Mary.
Thanks so much. Good morning. I, too, add my thanks to you, Mary Evelyn and John, for this wonderful conference. And I want to especially underscore the importance of the staff, beginning with Tara Trapani and others who have done such a marvelous job at making us feel welcome. So let's think about them this morning. Thank you to Sharon for chairing this panel, and to my friends and colleagues, Rosemary and Kyung, for amazing work over a long period of time. And now I'd like to cede the first minute of my time to contemplative silence. If we could just join one another in silence this morning before we begin the torrent of words. Thank you, and blessed be. I'd like to pick up this morning where we left off yesterday with a focus on the kinds of justice concerns that emerge from our common work in eco-everything. As an eco-feminist theologian, I concentrate on resources from women and queer people's experiences. So needless, and I wish there were more, in fact, people of color and queer people presenting in this conference so that we could hear the range and diversity of people working on these issues. I think that will come as our movements mature. Needless to say, Thomas Berry was not on the top of my list when I looked at women's issues and queer issues. But with Mary Evelyn's encouragement and having been so moved by so many of you who have been inspired by Thomas Berry, I've begun to read him to try to figure out what is the spark. Why is it that people are so excited? But it was only in reading what I call the Portable Thomas, that wonderful new Orbis book that you can buy at the bookstore, and I highly recommend. It was only in reading the Portable Thomas that I had the aha moment. I realized that I had read something similar before, not so much in content, but in dynamics. Surprising to me, imagine my surprise, the author was feminist philosopher and theologian Mary Daly, whose work I think comes closest to his of any feminist work that I know. They're a theological odd couple, I'll agree. But let me explain. My goal is to find resources to deepen our ties and to build coalitions of like-minded but differently situated people. I want to find and develop coalitions between like-minded but differently situated people and groups who are asking and trying to answer this cosmic conundrum of how life gives life or not. And ironically, I found in Mary Daly and Thomas Berry a certain kinship. So I want to start by talking a little bit about their lives. Then I want to look at them as champions of the cosmos. And finally, I want to tease out some eco-feminist implications of this for the study of religion. Because I think many eco-feminists in religion and many here present have found Berry's work helpful, I'm hoping that some of Berry's followers will find the work of eco-feminists helpful as well. I think it's that reciprocity, much of which frankly has been missing, that I think we can deepen and develop together. I'm struck by the similarities that I think have gone largely unnoticed. Berry offered an outline of a story capable of communicating the historical scaffolding of the universe. I mean, what a job. But Mary Daly provided the early and strong foundation for eco-feminist religious thinking, both doing so with a commitment to cosmic survival and thriving that I think becomes more urgent now after their natural deaths. Let me talk about them in contrast as 20th century Catholic outliers. That's how I think of them, 20th century Catholic outliers. Thomas Berry, 1914 to 2009, Mary Daly, 1928 to 2010, were both cradle Catholics who lived during a century of profound changes in their religious home, some of which changes they created. Give them credit. They were born into a church that was being expanded by immigrants and controlled in Rome. But they both had early mystical experiences, which I think shaped them profoundly. Thomas encountered creation in a grassy meadow with white lilies. Mary Daly found being, as she called it, in a clover, and later in a hedge. They were hardly what I would consider garden variety Catholic kids. That they turned into quasi-mystics later in life is no surprise. And to pass over this mystical component of who they were is, in my view, to miss the why of their prodigious efforts to explain and to embrace the world. They both studied theology and philosophy. Thomas's route took him through priestly ordination in the Passionist community. Mary Daly found her way through the thickets of sexist discrimination that prohibited her from studying philosophy in Catholic undergraduate programs, but eventually studied for three doctorates. They both taught in Jesuit institutions, but they were outliers even in those places, I think. As a Passionist cleric and a laywoman, respectively, they did not have the built-in access, or what I call affirmative action for Jesuits, in their institutions. Oh, you've met, yes, okay. Rather, I think about it, rather I think they were free, quote unquote, to do their work in much broader context. It shows in their remarkable creativity and scope. I dare say they were the most accomplished scholars in their generation in their respective institutions, though at least in Mary's case, prophets are not always recognized and appreciated in their own land. You'll remember that they were both smitten with Thomas Aquinas. The rigors of his thinking and the systematic way of working through arguments stood them both in good stead. They had studied Aristotle, but it was with Aquinas that they understood that matter matters. And then, of course, Berry looked at world religions, and Mary Daly looked at Tillich and process thought. But not even these were sufficient fields for their enormous reach. So they went on to create whole new discourses, and that's where we come in. Of course, they differed sharply in many ways. Mary was aggressively anti-church after Vatican II, given the way women were excluded. And Thomas was heavily imbued with the influence of world religions, especially Buddhism, so his focus wasn't on in-church issues either. What stands out for me is that both of them, while shaped in the Catholic ambiance of the 20th century, neither of them was mired in it intellectually, spiritually, or religiously. And I think that's a marvelous thing. Instead, they used their solid training in language, ideas, history, and speculative thought as a springboard to much broader arenas, nothing less than the cosmos. Let me move to my second point, which is how they were champions of the cosmos. I love this term, champions of the cosmos. Wouldn't you like to? I'd like to be a champion of the cosmos. Well, I don't know. It came to me from both of them. While others had their causes, Thomas and Mary were quite concerned with the cause of causes, with the final cause, with ideas of that magnitude. They thought big and bold about things, seeing both the forest and the trees, while others around them saw neither. Certain similarities obtain that for me are more interesting than their differences. Isn't that the truth, Mary Evelyn? The similarities that obtain are more interesting than their differences. First, they both had a certain central insight. For Thomas Berry, the universe is unique in its status insofar as everything else is described in relation to it. That's a very particular insight, to describe everything else in relation to the universe. And Mary Daly had one central insight, which is if God is male, then the male is God. But connected with that and more profoundly, I think she understood, and she said it this way, at the very core of the philosophy of Beyond God the Father is the realization that the women's revolution is participation in being, capital B-E-hyphen-I-N-G. It's being. So you begin to see the parallels between them. But even patriarchy was too small a canvas on which to paint what she called the blossoming of the intuition of being, which had been foretold in the bespeaking of the clover blossom. It all goes back to the clover blossom, or in Thomas's case, to the lily. Instead, she dealt with spiral galaxies. The second proof of their genius and creativity is the need for new words. It was Thomas who called himself a geologian. It was Mary who invented the dictionary of those new words in her Wikidary. A third aspect of their cosmos championing was found in the great work of Thomas and the great summation of Mary Daly. The great work, Thomas said, is moving from that period of human devastation of the earth to a period when humans can be present to the earth in a mutually beneficial way. In Mary's great summation, she says, rather we should focus on our enormous diversity within our unity. We're not merely 4,000 or 40,000 or even 40 million. We can communicate with each other and we can act in the world. These were what I would deem immodest treatises. But in fact, even those grandiose titles were not enough for the boundless and boundaryless content of these two thinkers. A fourth way in which they, in fact, can relate is how people, and look around, just take a minute and literally look around. Look at the people around you, their eyes, think of their work. This is the legacy of Thomas Berry and of Mary Daly, sitting in this room or at Genesis Farm or at Crystal Spring or doing Earth jurisprudence. Yes, I think there are three implications of this for our work as eco-feminist people in religion. First, I think that even the most seemingly disparate approaches, Daly and Berry, to eco-justice, eco-sanity, what I call eco-eros, have some overlapping and mutually beneficial elements. Just as Berry and Daly dovetail on their cosmic concerns, so do ecologists and ecofeminists. Gone are the days when ecologists can say, oh, you must deal only with our concerns because everything else is secondary. And gone are the days when ecofeminists can ignore the devastating environmental impact on the poorest of the poor, including men. The second implication is that the role of religion in ecological enhancement is pivotal. It helps no one to bring 20th century religion to the conversation of 21st century needs. The important changes in religion that have come about because of anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-ableist, post-colonial, queer, and other differentiated ways of shaping religion need to be reflected in the discourse and in the strategies. Third, the liturgies and rituals, the art, and other vivid expressions that carry the content of ecofeminist work in religion need to reflect equally differentiated sources. It serves no purpose to use the same language and imagery, the same hymns and texts, the same frameworks and roles to express a new reality. Much remains to be done, I conclude, to operationalize eco-feminist religious work. In the spirit of such unusual companions as Thomas Berry and Mary Daly, I believe it can and must be done with mystical faith, vivid diversity, and tireless energy. Thank you.
All right, great start. And next we're going to hear from Rosemary Radford Ruether.
Okay, my theme is ecology, feminism, and spirituality for a livable planet. And my talk continues to celebrate the wonderful work of Brian Swim, Mary Evelyn, and John in their journey of the universe, developing how we should begin to live in a new way for ecological health. I start with some reflections on the work of Bill McKibben. McKibben, as we all know, is a scholar and an activist on environmental crisis. He has written numerous books, such as The End of Nature and Deep Economy, and he founded the environmental organization Step It Up and 350.org. He has been urgent in his call to American society and the U.S. government to get serious on global warming. His most recent book, Earth, E-A-A-R-T-H, which is his term for our planet today. And according to McKibben, we are not facing a future threat of climate change that will fundamentally alter the planet. This has already happened. Already we are seeing warming temperatures, rising seas, melting glaciers, melting polar ice regions, chronic drought, heavy rains, flooding, reduced ability to grow food on a warming planet with rising population, which has passed 7 billion. For McKibben, this doesn't mean we should despair. We cannot turn back to the planet and its climate patterns that we enjoyed for 10,000 years during the era of flourishing human civilization, but we can do what is necessary to prevent the climate from getting worse. We can prevent CO2 in the atmosphere, which has risen from 280 parts per million to 392 to soaring to 500 parts per million, thereby greatly worsening the climate patterns to the point of human unsurvivability. But we must overcome climate change denial, which flourishes in the Congress, of course, with the claim that these are just regular variations in the climate and there's no crisis caused by human carbon emission. This denial is especially, of course, funded by fossil fuel companies who fund negative articles claiming that the issue is not scientifically proven and the facts are in dispute. Concern for climate change is spoken as is termed a liberal advocacy position. Obviously, that's bad by its very nature. A liberal and even a hoax that seeks, quote, increase government regulation and perhaps even world government. That's the sort of the devil word. All of this, of course, is totally misleading. The basic realities of the situation have wide agreement of the scientific community, and yet climate change is largely ignored by the American government in the last decade and more. It's crucial that we, the American people, who are, of course, the major cause of climate change emissions, finally get going on the problem. For McKibben, there are three big patterns of change that are necessary. First, the less rich and less powerful majority of the world needs to organize to counteract the rich 10%, and particularly the rich 1%, who control much of the wealth of the world and whose institutions, banks, and oil companies are roaring in the ears of politicians to prevent significant action for change. Secondly, we can and must implement in every local area alternative energy systems based on solar, wind, and other forms of sustainable energy, and develop local, organic, sustainable agriculture on a widespread basis. We know how to do this technologically, but lack the political will to implement it extensively as the major system of sustaining life. And finally, and perhaps first of all, we need to change the way we think. We need to overcome the ideologies of domination of nature and the false claim that we, humans, are really, in fact, the human elite, have a, quote, right to exploit nature. We need to create a new culture that recognizes humans as dependent members of the community of nature that needs to work with nature's own ways of sustaining and renewing itself. Now I turn now to talk a little bit about these alternative energy and agricultural systems. And I'll conclude by saying something about a spirituality for life. The term for this, ecofeminism, is a basic approach to changing the way we think about our relationship to nature so we can begin to change the way we live with nature. Ecofeminism recognizes that the domination of nature is interconnected with the domination of subjugated groups of people, racial people, colonized societies, impoverished people, queer people, women. Our imagery of domination of nature has been particularly interconnected with the subjugation of women, epitomized by terms like the rape of nature and, of course, Mother Nature. Nature should say, I ain't your mother. Ecofeminism recognizes that the ideologies of domination and exploitation of nature are based on patriarchy, that is to say, an ideology and legal, political, and economic system that assumes that a male elite can and should exploit and, of course, own nature by exploiting those who do the work to cultivate nature, namely slaves, peasants, women, and so on. An ideology built on a symbol system of male over female. This patriarchal ideology developed first in the law codes of the ancient Near East in the second millennium BC. It was expressed in the law codes of Greek society, especially Aristotle, and in Roman law. It was absorbed into Christianity and shaped Western civilization for 2 millennia. And it's only as the crisis of human civilization appears in our own time that climate change appears, that we become acutely aware of the need to fundamentally change the way we think and, of course, act in our relationship to nature and in relationship, of course, to each other in terms of classes, races, and genders. Now, having talked a little bit about that, I want to then turn to how we are dealing with fossil fuel emissions resulting in rising temperatures, more erratic storms and droughts, and all of that means that the growing of food becomes more difficult for farmers in many parts of the world. Large industrial agriculture then becomes problematic as the way to produce adequate food for a growing population, despite, of course, their claims to the contrary, that they are the only way to do this. As always, these crises affect particularly or most severely the poorest people with little land who lack resources for seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, and petroleum-driven machines for the Western-style agriculture. But as this corporate model of agriculture is falling into crisis, it seems to me that local farmers in many parts of the world are discovering alternatives, often alternatives that go back to earlier methods of agriculture in their region, but with a new understanding. There is a return to local production for local consumption, and this means smaller farms, but with a great variety of crops. Planted in interrelationship with each other, and with small herds of animals and chickens that produce organic fertilizer and the composting of organic waste. More people are employed in sowing, weeding, and harvesting rather than displacing the workers by machines. The big monocrops of industrial agriculture, petroleum pesticides and fertilizers, the toxic waste produced by crowding animals into pens, all of these are discarded for more organic methods. Now, in addition to community farms, I think there has also been a big increase of urban and suburban growing in towns and cities, even large cities like San Francisco and New York, where rooftop and garden farms are producing crops, and more people are producing food for their own family. In the community in which I live, which is Pilgrim Place in Claremont, we have over 200 fruit-bearing trees and numerous vegetable gardens, and we have a weekly market that basically exchanges these foods to each other for our own maintenance. And what is left over goes to a food bank that serves poor and homeless people. And the profits then go into a fund for emergency medical needs for our community. For me, that's a model for how we begin to deal with this. But these changes mean, it seems to me, changing the way we live our everyday lives. Today, we're facing a crisis of the planetary system, which has sustained human civilization. And so it seems to me we need to recreate egalitarian eco-communities with a positive view of nature. We need to enter into communities of life, not only with our fellow humans, but with plants, animals, water, wind, earth, and we need to attune our energies to the ecosystems around us. Many of the ways we need to become attuned to the natural world will, I think, enhance our sensibilities. We need to cultivate food organically, to generate energy from sunlight, wind, and water, and this will make our lives more complex, but I think more related to our natural environment. Becoming more attuned to our ecological surroundings I think can enhance our lives spiritually and morally, aesthetically, even liturgically. Now, these spiritual disciplines of renewal of life by composting, I'm calling that a spiritual discipline, composting, renewing soils, growing food, saving water, generating energy from sun and wind, these will link us in local communities, but these then relate to larger communities and ultimately to the whole earth as our eco-community. The new world we are entering, I think, is frightening. Life will not be easy for us, but the new relationships that we need to develop to survive on what McKibben calls this tough new planet, really can create a deeper responsibility to other humans, to animals, and to the ecosystems around us. And in this process, this can also create a new delight in everyday life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, we're going to hear from Chung from Union Theological Seminary.
Good morning, everybody. Now I'm writing a book called Four Seasons with Thomas Berry. A Korean publishing company commissioned me to meet him every season for 3 years. So I had this wonderful privilege to meet him every season, one weekend, spring, summer, fall, winter. But he said I shouldn't publish this book before he died. And far after he died, he said, you should publish that book. So now I try to finish this book. I'm usually a storyteller, but since we have only 12 minutes, I read just some part of this big story. So you can feel something, like if you taste a drop of water, you can taste ocean. I have a friend in Korea whom I admire very much. She is the dean of a women's college. Her equilibrium and tranquility in the midst of a very busy administrative schedule always makes me wonder, what is her secret? She's so different from most of the people I know in academia. When I had a chance to visit her office, I asked how she maintained her calmness. She pointed the picture in front of her desk. That is the reason. I looked at the picture. It was a picture of the universe. In the middle of the picture, there was a very small, tiny dot, barely seen. There was a pin stuck with a message on the dot. It says, "You are here." We gazed each other's eyes and smiled. She said, when I finish my very difficult meetings and come back to my office, I look at this picture. Then I laugh at all my seriousness and attachment to small things. Hey, after all, we live on this small dot. This picture gives me a perspective of life. Thomas Berry, for me, is that picture. He's the one who expanded my theological time and space far beyond the historical time and my everyday locality of struggle. He taught me that I'm a stardust from the Big Bang, and we are explosive volcanic rocks which now can sing opera. When I look back my encounter with him, my Christian side tell me, hey, it was indeed a predestination. My Buddhist side also tells me it was due to millions of years of accumulated good karma. Because of Thomas Berry, my Korean eco-feminist theology and spirituality, which I call Salimist theology and spirituality, has gone through some deep creative transformation. Salim is Korean word for women's traditional everyday chore and household management to make life possible, like cooking, taking care of children and people and surroundings. But the literal meaning of Salim is much deeper. It means making things alive. For last 30 years, many Korean women called their movement as a Salim movement. Korean women countered many forms of power of death in our personal and social life with the power of Salim, making things alive. Today, I would like to share with you my unfolding of Salimist theology and spirituality, and my theopraxis in relation to person and work of Thomas Berry. Since I met Thomas Berry in the year 1996, I had a great opportunity to visit him many weekends at his hermitage in Greensboro, North Carolina, for the period of 3 years before his death. The title of the book I'm writing about that experience is 4 Seasons with Thomas Berry, A Journey with a Universe, Thomas Berry. Spring. It was December 1996. I received a request from a Catholic priest I knew from a Korean ecological movement. He said he would like to meet Father Thomas Berry and asked me to set up an appointment with him. Until then, I didn't have any idea who Thomas Berry was. The Korean priest wrote a doctoral dissertation on Thomas Berry's thought, and his conservative committee did not want to give him a doctoral degree. Thomas Berry's theology was too far out from the traditional Catholic theology for the committee members. The young priest wanted to get a guidance from Thomas Berry regarding which university he should go in USA to complete his doctoral degree. Since I knew the narrowness of Korean theological world very well, I wanted to help the young priest. I called Thomas Berry. I found the phone number through the acquaintance, and I was anxious whether he will receive our request. But he just said, "Come on up." And we met this geologian at the airport. And I did not interested in his theology very much at the time, but I heard from this young priest that he studied in China and he had to leave China because of Mao's Cultural Revolution. Oh, interesting. Then he also said Thomas Berry was a doorman in his Catholic school because they didn't like Thomas Berry's thought very much. They didn't give him a teaching job. He was a doorman for a while. I liked it very much. Then also, this man is calling himself a theologian. So, when I met these two men, talk about many languages I do not know, such as Eco-joic. But I just listened to them. Then after the evening of a great conversation, Thomas Berry put us to sleep in his main house. Priest in the last room in east side, my room, the last room west side in his house. Summer. Then some years later, I think it was the summer of 1998, he invited me to be his dialogue partner for a summer retreat in Canada. I was both surprised and honored since I did not have any contact with him after our first encounter at his hermitage. The summer retreat with Thomas Berry was held at a peaceful retreat center around Toronto. Many people came. Interestingly, all of them were white, except the Korean young priest who now doing his doctorate in Toronto, a native woman speaker, and myself. Participants were very nice people from all walks of life. Eco-feminist theologians, healers of natural medicine, musicians, poets, and scientists. I was, however, very uncomfortable in this setting. I have not been this kind of almost white people's group for a long time. I thought at the time that maybe only white people with some economic safety could afford thinking about the universe. It was interesting, though, to observe these people totally immersed themselves in the Native American ritual of smoking of a pipe together. Thomas Berry gave a talk about the four wisdom which we need to pay attention to in order to participate in the journey of the universe in our time. They were indigenous wisdom, woman's wisdom, the wisdom of classical tradition and science. He spoke as if he read poetry or he was giving an oracle to us in his shamanic or mystical trance. His thoughts were so right, profound, and vast, but something in me started to become uncomfortable, suspicious, and rebellious. When my turn to respond to Thomas Berry, I expressed my deep uncomfortableness toward his grand and beautiful insight with 3 points. I told him, Father Berry, first, your universal story is too universal for me. I feel lost. All my historical specificity and everyday struggle in your grand meta-narrative. I don't know why. Why the universe? Maybe a universe, your universe. Your universalized story makes me feel disempowered rather than empowered. Second, you seem radically liberal to me. Your invention of new humanity with the different stories and human consciousness sounds so right and great. As a person from a radical people's movement for change, the structural evil, I feel a little bit irritated by the beauty and easiness in your great dream. I know how much sweat, blood, and human sacrifices are made to resist the radical evil in this world. Third, I appreciate your uplifting of indigenous and women's wisdom. But I have this sense that there is some idealization of these traditions on your part. Not every indigenous wisdom or women's wisdom is empowering to the many women in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We need to talk more concretely and more embodied manner. I asked him more concrete contextual questions, and he answered me more poetically and mystically. I felt frustrated. I thought he was like a slippery fish. Finally, when we had a conversation at the University of Toronto in the last evening of the retreat, I was as if being possessed by the spirit of Mary Daly. I criticized patriarchal Christian church, man's idealization of femininity for saving the world after they ruined the world, and this abstract grand meta-narrative of a universe story like a mad woman. I saw Thomas Berry become more and more angry with me, and we exchanged sharp remarks, and the Passionist priest Stephen Dunn, who was the preside, made both of us calm down. I remember that I came home thinking, oh well, I'm not a very good conversation partner for a celibate ascetic Catholic priest. Why in the world he invited me to be his theological partner? Fall. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Thomas Berry. He made a sincere apology for not listening to me more carefully and with an open heart. And he also added that the way he responded to my questions were wrong. He wrote that he would think about what I challenged more deeply and suggested to have continuing conversation in the future. I have never received this kind of letter from any male theologians I argued in my life. And not any man at all. I was moved by his humility, sincerity, and open-heartedness. He did not need to write that kind of letter of apology to a young woman scholar who is a half of his age. I did not have any intention to write a letter of apology to him, and I also did not expect any apology from him. It was a brand new experience for me. Thomas Berry has become more and more intriguing for me with that letter. I started to read his book more carefully with open heart. I took my student from Union Theological Seminary to Genesis Farm to see an earthly manifestation of his vision by Catholic sisters. I started to have a deep longing to know about his universe. Winter. I received an email from his sister Margaret, that Thomas Berry passed away in the summer of 2009. My heart dropped. I had a very quiet day missing him. Then I called my good friends to celebrate Thomas Berry's return to great oneness. We opened a bottle of champagne and made a toast for him. Great work, well done, my dearest dreamer of the universe. Then another spring. You will read this long spring thing in your website when they published. But I'll just finish by reading this letter at the end. Dear Father Thomas Berry, today is your 100th birthday. Happy birthday to you. I know you are smiling at us wherever you are now. I feel it. In the morning of your 100th birthday, I'm writing a long overdue response letter to your kind letter to me you wrote more than 15 years ago. Now I know why I was so irritated and frustrated by the universe story back then. Your great vision was not a problem. Since my heart was so broken by the cries and pain of suffering of people, by the radical evil of our time, whether they were crazy mammon-possessing neoliberalism, military-industrial complex, power-hungry, violent patriarchy, I could not hear or did not want to hear your grand story. It was too beautiful to receive with my bleeding heart. I thought you could uphold that majestic story, but I couldn't. You seem so far from everyday struggle of people in my oppressed system. But now I see and feel differently about the universe story. Today, I know that we all are participating in the universe story, and we are the universe story. When I meet many young Salimists, young eco-feminists, I witness cosmogenesis in their struggle to make a better human system, their effort to protect and live peacefully with the Mother Earth, and their immense creativity to transform today's culture. Indeed, they are reinventing the human with their whole body, mind, and soul in their struggle. I see the journey of the universe in their journey of making all things alive in their concrete everyday life struggle. They are different from even my generation. I witness so much joy, life force, and creativity in their struggle for justice, peace, and keeping the integrity of this amazing mystery called Earth. Now I know that we are feeling your grand universe story with our everyday struggle and efforts with great diversity of historical concrete embodiment. It is our job to do. You have already done your great work. We are joyfully following your footsteps today in our common journey of universe. We miss you, we love you, and we thank you. Happy 100th birthday to you. Sending you silent power, Father Barry.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. We're going to have some questions. I do want to say Journey of the Universe is in Korean, and it was one of the first translations. It's also in Italian and French, and the film is in Spanish. And I do want to say we've had a great group of feminist theologians working with us, especially since the conference at Harvard in 1997, where Rosemary Ruether helped edit that volume on Christianity and ecology. Sally McFaig was there. Elizabeth Johnson was there. She would have been here, except she had another engagement. Heather Eaton was there. We have Canadian friends, many of them working on these issues. Catherine Keller has been a huge supporter. Carolyn Merchant at Berkeley, Eleanor Ray, and Bernice Marie Daly, who I think is here as well, along with Chung. These have all been key feminist voices in this movement for a very, very long time. And we welcome the next generations of those voices as well. So this was an amazing panel, a few questions and a few responses.
Just a comments of thoughts about the advancing the conversation between ecofeminism and the cosmic vision. And what tensions, if any, you see between our technological world and the manipulation of nature.
Mary Evelyn, we couldn't catch the last part of the question.
Manipulation of nature.
Manipulation of nature.
Technology and manipulation
Okay.
of nature.
And by the way, what's going to happen is you're each going to have a chance to respond, but you can take one question. Probably you won't be able to do all of them. So we're going to just take a bouquet of questions here.
Okay.
James.
Thank you. I'm curious about how feminism really contributes to this, to the solution. It seems to me that that the attack on our idea of gender has been successful in its initial round, and that what we really need to attack now is our concept of species. The idea that your definition of species determines who can exploit and eat and kill whom. And I wanted to know whether that makes sense from a feminist perspective, and in general, why looking at it from a feminist perspective is not a blind alley because you can simply replace people who hold positions in the patriarchy with females, and you still have the same unsustainable
Thank
system.
you. We want very short questions. Okay.
I'm going to let Larry and Dan take care.
First place, thank you so much. I was moved to tears, Chung, by your comment. As I was driving up here this morning, I was listening to a tape on creativity, and one of the things they said was, we have to ask, what would nature do? I stopped, turned the tape off, and thought about that for a while, because we're saying that it's not despair. Nature is going to guide us. So I'm wondering how you think nature... Rosemary, you said, finally we have to get going on this problem. All of you, how are we going to let nature guide us?
It seems to me that the most relevant thing is that Western religions and many of the great religions in the East have not got a strong sense of the sacred feminine. If you go to the native peoples of this continent, Mother Earth is not a figure of speech. She's a living reality. And we have a great deal of trouble thinking of the divine having anything feminine about it. I think we need to talk about that.
Lots of feminine gods in Hinduism. Tons of them.
Thanks very much to the panel. Just on a personal note, I've been really reflecting hearing you all speak about my grandma and how much of a role model she's been for me. I think it's about midnight in Australia at the moment, so I've had to sort of stop myself from running out and giving her a call, which I don't think she'd appreciate very much, but I wanted to say thanks for that little gentle reminder. I suppose my question is, as someone kind of new and engaging with this work and with ecofeminist work, would be really interested in the panel's advice on things for those of us, I suppose for young men and for people who are in other positions of privilege, to be mindful of as we're engaging with the work you've done, so that we can avoid, I suppose, reproducing some of the things that have occurred in the past, or so we can engage with those in a more mindful way.
I think we're going to go to the panel for their brilliant concluding remarks.
Thank you.
Please be brief and powerful.
Okay. We just have about 5 minutes total. So go ahead.
I'd like to respond.
Okay, Rosemary.
Well, I think, first of all, we need to be clear, which apparently after several decades has not gotten across to some people, that feminism is not about replacing male domination with female domination. This has nothing to do with feminism. Feminism, which is also concerned, as I said, with the hierarchies of domination of class and race, is about justice. And is part of a coalition of movements of justice that really is trying to create a more participatory world, and also a world that's no longer shaped by patterns of male over female domination. You want to say a little something to that?
Yeah, I'll just pick up from that and say that I think that the questions, particularly having to do with what can we do about this, are really important. Our colleague, the law student from Oz and so forth, I think this is really very much to the point, because if we can't work together on things like gender and race and sexuality and class and economic issues, what makes us think that we're going to do any better with species or with the Earth itself? I think this is rather a naive notion that having failed in these other areas, or at least not, if these are practices, I think, and I see them all as practices that are interrelated. And in order to be able to think about moving into areas where we have less knowledge, for example, in terms of the animal world or in the physical world, versus what we have knowledge of in terms of one another, I'm dubious that we're able to do that. And so I think that it's very crucial what Rosemary has put her finger on, which is the hierarchical dualisms that have set up certain ways of thinking. And it goes to the question in the back about the images in religion. I think that also is not solved completely by feminine images by any means, but by an opening of a wide variety of well beyond anthropomorphic images as well in a range of traditions. So I think that's work that needs to be done. And then to the question of technology, I think and the question of nature, I think those two questions we could take together and spend a day on to think together about how the approaches that are non-hierarchical, non-dualistic, and attempting to integrate the praxis that we've been talking about all weekend have shaped nature, so that what we experience as nature is quite different than what our ancestors may have experienced as nature, and then to think beyond that in terms of how technology is a tool and not simply one more way of destroying that kind of balance that we seek. So that's just a way to begin. Kyung, you might want to pick up on that.
Yeah. Yes. In many Asian mythology and cosmology, nature is the most principal Tao, like a Taoism. The most enlightened being is person who live like a nature. That is the place of nature. Also, Korean ecological movement, especially in Jeju Island, they are fighting against this nuclear naval base, U.S. nuclear naval base in the most pristine, beautiful island in Korea. Many young feminists bring this traditional image of goddess mythology who made this Jeju Island. When she has a bowel movement, it became a mountain. When she urinates, it became an ocean. When she just sneezes, this bowel went to some other place, it became an island. So I don't think it is just accident that they bring this image of divine feminine to be empowered in their struggle for eco-feminist struggle.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful morning.